Bill Self hired Jacque, Vaughn, and Tony Bland. They've already landed the number one point guard in Taylen Kinney. Is Self about to become the next one and done factory in college basketball?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks so much for making it your first listen every day, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of LOJ, we are breaking down KU basketball recruiting and how, due to some recent events and things that they've done with hiring and landing Taylen Kinney, is it possible that Kansas is about to become that next, John Calipari Duke team that's bringing in several one-and-dones each and every year and just bringing in a load of talent each and every year? Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Game Time, which you can use to buy tickets for the upcoming KU basketball season. Just create an account, download the Game Time app, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Okay, so if you've been living under a rock, and thank you if you already caught the episode, but KU landed Taylen Kinney. He's the number one point guard in the class of 2026, and now they have another player that's going to be two other players that are going to be committing later this week. Now, will Kansas land both of them? I don't know. Will Kansas land one of them? But they are in the running for both, and it certainly seems like Kansas has put themselves in good shape to possibly land both players that are going to be committing this week. We'll get on that, more on that a little later in the show. But there's been plenty of other players, right, guys, that haven't decided yet, that have visited KU, that seem to have some level of interest from KU. I mean, we all remember Tyron Stokes, the number one player in the class of 2026, visiting KU this past offseason. So it just feels like that, you already have Kinney aboard. It feels like you're going to have some other commits coming in, other players that you have your, irons in the fire, so to speak. And it just feels like this is about to be a very special recruiting class for Bill Self and for KU. And this was after Taylen Kinney committed to Kansas. Joe Tipton from On3 tweeted out this quote from an interview with him, and he said, "Shoot, I already know the one that's coming. Right when I said I was going, I put that call in. I ain't going to say his name, but he going to announce." So one of those players that's going to be announcing this week, you would assume he's going to go to KU, if not both, again. And then he also mentioned, Kinney said, and then trying to get Tyron, as in Tyron Stokes. And I think both are originally from Kentucky before they, went out to, I guess, the West Coast and are playing this level of prep basketball. So point being, this has the chance to be a very special class in terms of what Bill Self is bringing in. Now, could it just be a one-off, or could this be a way of going about things for the future? And that's where I think this is really, really interesting, because if we go back to Bill Self's comments about freshmen, this was at Bill Self's most recent press conference, the last press conference he had, and this was a direct quote back on August 15th. "Sometimes freshmen are easier to coach than transfers because freshmen don't know any better, where transfers have been taught their own way of doing things, and your way may be different." So I just can't help but wonder, with how the transfer portal has gone for KU, where there have been some, big whiffs here or there, where this past off season you get into some bidding wars and maybe lose out on a player, and it forces you to go to plan B or plan C. It forces you to go overseas with recruiting some players, or forcing guys to, not forcing, but, getting players to reclassify. It forced you to get really creative and work late into the offseason this year. Is it possible that Bill Self is saying, you know what, maybe this is better to bring in freshmen, bring in a lot of really talented freshmen, because with the transfer portal players, they haven't always come in and just worked perfectly into my system. And, when you get this past off season and you end up in some of these bidding wars, and then you lose out on them and you have to, make these other concessions, do you get to a certain point where you say, but I've always kind of had success with the high school game. Maybe I'm focusing too much on the portal, and I'd rather land the big fish at the high school level that can be an uber talented player, a future NBA player, than go this route as much. Doesn't mean you're not going to use the portal. You still will. You have to use the portal in today's day and age. But do you get your stars, similar to how this roster is built? Do you get the star players on your team via the high school ranks, and surround them with good role players in the transfer portal, and then maybe have a couple like program guys that have been developing and, can play a role on your team. Is that the ideal way that Bill Self sees, building a roster after these last 2 years in which you did hit the portal hard and you had your 2 worst seasons in terms of the seeds that Bill Self got in his time at Kansas? And so you take that into account. Then they hire, and these hirings came, I guess, before those comments, but or at least the Jacque Vaughn one did. But they hired Jacque Vaughn and they hired Tony Bland, right, as their 2 assistant coaches. And Jacque obviously comes with being a former, just all everything guard at Kansas. His jersey is hanging in the rafters at Allen Fieldhouse. Has an NBA playing career. He has coaching experience, assistant head coach in the NBA. And like Taylen Kinney mentioned him as being a key part of the recruitment and why he chose KU. It's hard not to see the impact of Jacque Vaughn and because Kansas wasn't seen as the favorite in the Taylen Kinney recruitment. And then he came and visited, and that changed. Now, how much was it, the visit was great, and how much was Bill Self, and how much were the players, and how much was money talks, right? That is important in today's day and age. But like to some extent, Jacque Vaughn was important in the recruitment of Taylen Kinney, right? Which makes sense because Vaughn, a former point guard, and Kinney comes in to play that position. And especially when you look at what Vaughn is doing, seemingly the work he's putting in with Darren Peterson, right? So it's hard not to see that and the impact that could possibly have. And then and the impact that it could possibly have on future players down the road. And then you look at Tony Bland, and Tony Bland comes with a bunch of recruiting ties, whether it was at his previous stops or some of the guys out there. I mean, Taj Ariza was somebody that KU was kind of circling around to because of him, but because he could like coach him in high school. That visit fell through, but like there's still plenty of other West Coast talent that Bland has, ties to, or at least you would think is a little bit more familiar with being from over there. Like Christian Collins is a top 10 recruit in the class. Maximo Adams is a top 25 recruit. Adams already visited, like Collins, maybe he will visit. There's a bunch of players, if you look at the top rankings from the West Coast, California, Arizona, etc. Even like Tyron Stokes, originally from Kentucky, but he's playing his high school ball in Southern California. And so you look at the additions of those 2 guys combined with maybe a mindset shift from Bill Self, it just seems like having those guys who have a really strong ability in Vaughn and Bland to relate to players. I mean, it's not just Vaughn who was a really good point guard in college. Bland was I don't know if Bland was a point guard, but he was a really good guard in college. I mean, he was putting up like over 16 points per game for San Diego State his last year in college basketball. Those 2 guys probably can relate to the players in a lot of ways because they've been through the grind of college basketball and been very good players. So that doesn't hurt the ability, and seemingly it's helping KU in this regard. And so if you're Bill Self and you're saying, you know what, I would rather be able to coach up a freshman and teach them the things I want them to do, as opposed to trying to coach out a transfer portal player or basically just having a finished product that I can't really change and hope that it works out. I would rather go out there and bring in that freshman. And then if I have these good assistant coaches who help me in the recruiting to bring these players on, and now you're seeing the effect of it. And certainly like you can probably attribute some of this too to the Darren Peterson effect. Being able to land Darren Peterson, it certainly helped you in the Taylen Kinney commitment. He had some quotes and comments about that being the case. And does it just keep the line going, right? Does Darren Peterson help you land Taylen Kinney? And does Taylen Kinney help you land the next Taylen Kinney? And does that kid help you land the next kid when you're able to kind of keep it going in that way? And so you add it all together, and I can't help but wonder if this is not just going to be a one-year thing where it's like, hey, we're going big on this high school recruiting class, and this is not going to be a mentality shift to Bill. So we've seen different mentality shifts, for a few years here or there through different times, whether it's been schematically, like how they've played 4 out around 1, playing 2 bigs or whatever it is, like with high school recruiting, with transfer portal recruiting. And I can't help but think, combined you're fully out of the NCAA investigation stuff now. You've had some swings and misses in the portal. Like John Calipari's still going to bring on big recruits, but he's no longer at Kentucky. So I don't think it's going to be as much of a stranglehold. And I think Mark Pope is going to use the transfer portal more than Calipari was. Certainly Duke is still going to be Duke and get, the high level 5 stars that they want to a certain extent. But for a long time, it was Duke and Kentucky were both doing that. So does Kansas fill kind of that role a little bit more? And I think there's another interesting question with this of like, is it actually more affordable to use NIL this way And how does the rev share, how does David Booth's donation kind of help with all that? Let's get to that next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Today's episode of LOJ is brought to you by Quo. One of the tools that helps make a huge difference for business owners is Quo, formerly OpenPhone. It's the same great business phone system you've heard us talk about here on Locked On, but just with a new name. And here's why it matters. Every missed call is money left on the table. When every customer conversation counts, you need a phone system that keeps you connected 24/7. Quo is the #1 business phone system that streamlines customer communications. It works right through an app on your phone or computer, so no more carrying 2 phones or relying on a landline. Whether you're a solo operator juggling everything of part of a larger team, Quo makes it easy to stay responsive and professional. See why over 90,000 businesses trust Quo, formerly OpenPhone. Get started free and get 20% off your first 6 months at quo.com/lockedoncollege. That is quo.com/lockedoncollege. And if you've got existing numbers with another service, Quo will port them over at no extra charge. Quo, no missed calls, no missed customers. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll have plenty of more KU football talk with a KU UCF preview and crossover episode and keys to the game, all that coming up later this week on Locked On Jayhawks. And of course, if there's any more commitment news this week, we'll get to that too, right here with LOJ. So make sure to subscribe to the show, and thank you to everydayers who already are. All right. So part of this too that I think is interesting, is it more or less expensive with NIL to bring in a bunch of high school recruits? I think you can make the argument either way. Obviously, like guys like Darren Peterson and AJ DeBonta, that guy's going to be more expensive, right, than the top transfer guy. I think some of the numbers that were floated, I mean, DeBonta, the number he floated out there, I think it was what, like 5 million, 6 million. I think that was more than, I think the number that was floated out there for like Yaxel Landenberg, whatever it is, who was like the really good UAB transfer, could have been maybe like a late first round pick, ends up, transferring to Michigan, was like 4.5 million or something. So, but that's crazy though, because I guess like there's a chance like the floor is much higher that Landenberg could come in and he's probably going to be an all conference player, but the ceiling is much higher on a guy like DeBonta. Then again, we've seen freshmen come in and struggle. So the floor is lower in that situation. But I actually think, like, to me, paying 4 to 5 million for a top tier guy that could potentially be a top 5 pick in the NBA draft, I do think that's going to be a higher ceiling for your team. And maybe my judgment is just clouded by I guess I'm thinking of like the KU comparisons. Like, think about the top high school rated recruits that KU has brought in under Bill Self. Andrew Wiggins, he was a second team All-American. I know it didn't end the way you wanted to, but again, if Joel Embiid's healthy, who knows? Josh Jackson had an unbelievable year with Kansas. Those guys would have been worth the money. Whereas when you think back to who would be the 2 biggest transfer portal gets for KU during the Self era, just in terms of when they got them, right? You can make an argument, oh, was it Jeff Withey based on what happened? But, when they first got him, it wasn't as big as when they got, say, Hunter Dickinson or when they got Dedrick Lawson. Again, maybe you could argue Remy Martin as well. But if we're just looking at Dedrick Lawson and Hunter Dickinson, those guys are really productive college players. But how much did they raise the ceiling of Kansas? Or were they just floor raisers? Because, like, I guess the way I'm getting at this is the guys who are transferring in the portal, they're in the portal because they want I shouldn't say this, and Lawson, was before NIL, but point being, they were in the portal for different reasons than, I guess you would say a high school freshman is. A high school freshman is going to his college because he has to go to college before he goes to pro. If a really good All-American level productive college player is in the portal instead of going pro, it's most likely because of the fact that they haven't had the chance to go pro. They didn't get that first round promise or whatever. And so there's going to be limitations on that player, I guess is what I'm saying, where it's a higher floor, but it also is a lower ceiling. And so from that perspective, I would rather take the home run swing on, bringing on a Darren Peterson or a top 5 recruit, of what it could potentially be in raising your ceiling than bringing on a player who you're going to pay enough that they're going to have to be the focal point of everything you do, but might have certain flaws in their game of the reason why they're still in college, if that makes sense. Now, the next tier, I think, kind of becomes debatable. I have no idea, but like, for instance, a $3 million player, is that one where you'd rather use it on a portal player than a high school player? Maybe, because if you're talking about a high school kid who's ranked between, I don't know, like 10th to 25th, and they're going to be $3 million, which I don't know, that might be too expensive. And you're comparing, like, say, Darian Williams, for instance, is getting like $2.5 million. I guess in that situation, give me Darian Williams. But like even then, it kind of depends because you're talking like Grady Dick, and like Grady Dick was a really productive player, and so I don't know. It just becomes very interesting because does getting the high school kid increase your chances of landing another high school kid, either in this class because they're friends or buddies with somebody else, or they're going to recruit for you, or it helps you in the future, right? With Darren Peterson to Taylen Kinney, right? And the other part of this too that I think is helpful with the high school recruiting is it gives you one less spot you have to fill in the offseason. Because here's the thing, like right now, if you can land these high school commits, it's almost like, yes, there's going to be a lot of, everybody technically can bid on it now, but at the end of the day, a lot of teams are going to save their money for the following offseason in the transfer portal, and then they're going to know exactly what they have available, both in terms of playing time, shots, opportunities, starting lineup positions, money to have. And then everybody's going to be in that situation like, hey, I have $10 million. This is what I can spend on this player and this player and this player. If you get ahead of that right now, don't you think that helps than opposed to like, oh no, we're now in the beginning of May, and instead of you bidding, right now it might be more like, I don't know, restrained or like disciplined bidding, where it's like, hey, we can't overbid on this player in September, in October, who's going to be a freshman, because we don't know how much we're going to have available for the rest of the roster if we do that. So it has to be more disciplined if you do it right now, versus if you go out in May and land one of the top transfers, you could be like, oh, we have by far the biggest offer. Everybody was offering $2 million. We upped it to $3 million. And then all of a sudden one team comes out there and a big booster writes a check and they go, yeah, we just have one final big roster spot. Here's $3.5 million. And it starts getting a little crazier. Do you avoid some of that crazy? I know this is crazy to think because for so many years, college basketball, high school recruiting was where the crazy Wild West was. And now it feels like some of that, not all of it, some of it has shifted over to the transfer portal. So I don't know, just kind of food for thought here of, I don't have the answer exactly. Like we don't know and we won't until if these numbers ever get publicized, which if they become contracts, then that would kind of be the situation. But like, for instance, what is the comparison between the top transfer portal guys versus the top high school recruits versus the second tier of high school recruits versus the second tier, and on and on and on down the list? Could you convince me that, yeah, like it actually is more efficient money-wise to bring in those players? Or like, for instance, what if a top 50 high school kid costs $1 million, whereas a Jaden Dawson level player costs $1 million? What do you do there? Do you roll the dice on the high school kid because they might impact this year, they might not, and then they could transfer at the end of the year? Then again, they could develop and be a stud for you down the road. So it's like, it becomes a very interesting discussion, but I do think it's one that I'm at least open to, knowing how bonkers the transfer portal has gotten, that what if it just does become a little bit more efficient to use the high school game, at least for certain guys, kind of based on this. Now, obviously David Booth's, big donation that basically set Kansas up, beyond the Gateway district and everything it had to do with that. It also sets KU up in a way that they basically have this giant slush fund that's going to accrue interest and basically allow them to pay for their rev share. And this is something that is going to be a huge deal for KU basketball and all the KU sports in general. But I think it just makes it a lot easier for Bill Self and company to fully know that they have their rev share filled out and guaranteed or whatever, and that they have that money available. That's another piece of the puzzle of this. Going back to what I was saying, maybe some teams can't guarantee, hey, we're going to have this much money available for next year right now in September or October, a full year out before the next season, because they don't know what their donors are going to donate by then. Kansas is afforded that luxury by David Booth's donation that they can know right now, yeah, we're going to have our full rev share next year. And because of that, we know we can offer you this money. Whereas another school might be like, I don't know, maybe we should save it. Maybe we'll end up having that money, but I guess we'll just use it in the transfer portal. That is such an advantage for KU to know what they're kind of dealing with. And it also, allows that, for Bill Self or whoever in the athletic department from KU to kind of talk to donors about doing NIL deals where they don't have to, okay, we need to talk to this donor to pay for our rev share. And now we're going back to that same donor to be like, okay, we're filled up on rev share. Now can you give an NIL donation to this player as well? Now you don't have to do that. Now you have the rev share covered. Now all you have to ask for is the NIL deal or something like that, right? So I think it's going to help KU in a big way. And I think because of that certainty, I guess you would say, with the money, I guess if it is still in the market, I don't know if it's fully certain, but you know what I mean? I think that helps KU in this situation. And it wouldn't shock me if both from how Bill Self wants to build the roster just in general in terms of his coaching preference and how much he's enjoying coaching Darren Peterson, as well as maybe even a bit of the financial side. Again, it's very expensive to get high-level high school prospects, but is it like, have we gotten to a point where the transfer portal players are no longer a value? It's the same, or it's more expensive than the high school thing. Just kind of food for that. All right, let's finish up with some of the latest news, including with KU basketball recruiting. A couple commits are going to be committing later this week that have Kansas in their finalist list. A little KU soccer, KU volleyball as well. This is Locked on Jayhawks. Today's episode of LOJ is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL season's here, and FanDuel has an offer that you don't want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. That is a lot of money, a lot of dough that you can use on futures for the college basketball season. You can still get in-season future on the NFL and the college football season. And, you know, maybe you're in the NBA, maybe you're into the NHL. Like, those are getting ready to start up here too. We got MLB postseason going on right now. So, like, this is the who's who of sports going on at one time. Like, you only get so many Octobers in your life, and you can certainly add to it with your experience on FanDuel. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started with FanDuel. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked on Jayhawks, and thank you again for tuning in each and every day, making it your first listen. Don't forget to check out Locked on College Football, or we're into college basketball season, Locked on College Basketball for your second listen every day. So a couple of commits are going to, many commits probably that are going to be committing this week, but two that have Kansas on their finalist list. The first is coming up on Wednesday. So if you're listening to this on Tuesday, it'll be tomorrow. And that would be Trent Perry. Trent Perry is a just outside the top 100 recruit, 4-star recruit. He plays locally in the Missouri area. I think Link Academy is the name of it. I think he's originally from like Dallas, Texas or something like that, but, you know, playing at prep school. He's going to be committing Wednesday. Kansas, TCU, Maryland are the finalists there. Really lengthy wing. He's got like 7'1" wingspan, working on the shot, but maybe more of a developmental player. And going back to what we talked about with, you know, the money aspect here, is it easier to bring on a role player who's a freshman in terms of cost of money than it is to bring on somebody who would possibly be a role player out of the transfer portal? Because A, most players who are hitting the transfer portal want a bigger role or something, or they're just going to want more money. I don't know. That is certainly interesting, but we'll see if KU can land him. And then this Sunday, I believe, is when Davion Adkins, he is, it seems like Adkins and Taylor are KU's top center targets at this point in time. And with Adkins, he's kind of in the Flory Badunga, I don't know, camp of like, not the tallest center in the world. I think he's like 6'8", 6'9", but he's got really long arms, really big motor. And as we talk about the themes that Bill Self seems to be recruiting to, and maybe wanting to turn more into the talented freshman that he can feel like, you know, he can coach up to his liking a little more than the portal players. Also seems like he's finding kind of a type of what he wants at the center position, which is kind of your rim running center who can dunk, block shots, rebound, and just play hard. And you know, I think that's kind of very interesting, but we'll see if they land him over the weekend as well. So certainly a good start in recruiting for KU basketball. KU women's volleyball, since we last talked, you will not believe this. They lost in 5 sets to a ranked team. It was their home opener. And yes, they also did get up 2-1. So unfortunate. Arizona State's a very good team, though. Arizona State already beat Penn State this year. They were ranked 8th at the time of them playing. Again, I continue to believe that some of these are going to turn. Now, I thought that KU football, the one-score games would turn, and they haven't. So, like, eventually you do have to show the results. But they followed it up with a 3-0 sweep against Arizona. And now it's a big one. They're on the road at TCU coming up on Wednesday. TCU's ranked 12th. That'll be October 1st. And then they're on the road against 15th ranked Baylor on Friday. So really big week ahead. We'll see if they can turn that. Maybe one of those goes to 5 sets. Maybe they can start trending that in the right direction. It feels like once they win like one match in 5 sets, maybe it'll just open the floodgates and then they'll be just like unstoppable and win all their 5-set matches. That'd be pretty cool. But 10-6 now is the record for KU volleyball. For KU soccer, they had a great start to the season, and it still is a great start to the season, but not a good week last week for KU. Now, they did get a 1-0 win in their Big 12 opener against Oklahoma State, but lost 3-0 at home to Baylor, and then they took on a number 10 TCU squad, so, you know, understandable. But they lose 3-2, so unfortunately they're at home, too, for both of those to lose both. You would have hoped to at least come away with, you know, one result there in terms of a draw at the very least, but a chance to get back at it against Kansas State. That'll be a home game, Dillon Sunflower Showdown, Thursday, October 2nd, and then they're going to be on the road against Texas Tech the upcoming Sunday. But still overall, I would imagine looking like a tournament team. 7-2-2 is the record for Nate Lee and company. And they're undefeated so far on the road, 3-1 on the road. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. Plenty more KU football content, KU basketball content coming at you throughout the week here with LOJ. And we'll see you next time for another edition. See you then.